Hi, welcome to the iVisa webinar for members of the foreign media. My name is Nita Nicole Upadhye. I am the founder and managing attorney of NNU Immigration. We are a firm in London dedicated exclusively to the practice of US immigration with a focus on business visas, investor visas, and media visas. And I'm really enthusiastic about welcoming you here to the webinar to talk about the fine nuances of the iVisa category, which is the visa for members of the foreign media. It's a category that, if you get right, is quite a useful weapon in the arsenal. And because a lot of visas are time-consuming, challenging for media representatives, but there are a certain category of foreign media representatives that are eligible for the iVisa, and if you get it right, you can get your visa fairly quickly and get into the US to do your work. But certain requirements need to be met. We're going to cover that. We're also going to cover some of the common questions, the frequently asked questions that I receive quite often. We can open it up to any questions at the end for those who are tuning in. Let's get started. So an iVisa is for representatives of the foreign media organization traveling to the United States. Now, we're going to be breaking this down. We're going to really be breaking it down to three main areas. We're going to talk about who qualifies as a representative of the foreign media. We're going to talk about what is the foreign media, how that's defined in US immigration law. And then we're also going to talk about the type of material that would be classified as informational or news, part of the news gathering process, the type of material that qualifies for this visa. So broadly speaking, to give you an overview, the iVisa, as I mentioned, is for representatives of foreign media traveling to the US. The type of media representatives would be those who work in the press, radio, or film, and their activities must be essential to the media function, to the project that's being undertaken in the US. We'll cover that in more detail. And the material has to be of informational quality. It has to be seen as newsworthy. And if it is seen of having any entertainment or commercial value, that doesn't quite fit into the iVisa category. It has to be journalistic in nature, and it has to be the person who's going to cover the news has to be seen as disseminating information that's of value to a foreign audience. Typically, a visa is valid for 5 years and can be used for multiple entries. We'll cover that in more detail shortly. So let's dig into the fine point here. We first want to cover what it means to be a representative of the foreign media. Now, here we've got the definition here. Foreign media representative is a foreign national who's a bona fide representative of foreign press, radio, film, or other foreign information media whose activities are essential to the foreign media function. Now, if we talk about a foreign media representative who's a bona fide representative, we also want to look at what their credentials are. So they may work in radio, film, or television, but we also want to look at, do they have a degree in journalism or communications, or film or radio, or do they have, in the UK, there are other credentials you can get in the media. You can get a credential through a guild organization, or a National Council for Training of Journalism credential. That could put you in the running potentially for an iVisa. You also want to have a home office in a foreign country. So it's not enough to say that you have the credentials, you work in press, radio, or film, but you're not connected to an organization outside of the US. So you do have to be connected, whether you are a full-time staff member or whether you are a contract worker or freelancer. You do have to be linked in some way to a foreign media organization. You also then have to be looking to be going to the US to carry out that type of work that you do outside of the US. So you could be a member of a film crew, you could be a radio presenter, you could be a director, producer, whatever you are doing and whatever you have the skills to do and the qualifications to do, you should be doing that and undertaking those activities in the US. So to qualify as a member of the foreign media, you want to look at things like, what is this person's credentials, and what type of organization do they work for? How long have they been working in that role and in that function? And then, of course, are they going to be carrying out that role in the U.S.? So let's turn our attention to what it means to be a foreign media. How does U.S. immigration define the foreign media? They look at organizations that have news bureaus or offices in countries outside of the US. So ideally, take for example, the BBC. That's British Broadcasting Corporation. They are primarily based in the UK and they disseminate news all over the world, but their main focus is their British audience. So that would be an obvious example of a foreign media organization. But there's hundreds and thousands of foreign media organizations that have a base outside of the US that send qualified foreign media representatives to the US to cover US news for that foreign audience. And so we want to look at the nature of the organization, where their headquarters is, where do they primarily function from, and where's the base of operations, and are there offices and bureaus around the world facilitating the collection of information and dissemination of information to that foreign audience. Now, an American organization could potentially be seen could qualify as a foreign media organization if that American media organization has offices in other countries. So it's doesn't require that the organization or news bureau solely has headquarters outside of the U.S. Let's look now, let's turn our attention to the type of material that qualifies for this visa category. It's really important not only to look at if you have someone who qualifies as a member of the foreign media and you're working with an organization that is quite obviously a foreign media organization, then you want to look at what's the project, what is this person going to the US for, and what are they actually doing. And so we look at the content. What is the material that's being reported or filmed or photographed? And what is that being used for? So members of the media engage in a production qualify only if that information is being used genuinely to disseminate news. And so the activities must be informational in content. And it must be part of a news gathering process. And there's a wide variety within that definition of material that qualifies for I-Visa status. So it doesn't only have to be hard news. So you're not only looking at a BBC reporter who's covering political news. We've worked on I-Visas for people who are covering travel information, and who are, we worked with a TV crew who was traveling around the US to interview and cook with regional chefs. So they were sharing with their British audience news and information and interesting commentary about regional food in the United States. And that was seen as informational, that was seen as newsworthy to a foreign audience. And so that qualified as material for I-Visa purposes. We've also worked with a radio crew that was covering the Grammy Awards. And you might think, well, isn't that just mentioned that it can't be for entertainment or commercial purposes? But from the embassy's point of view, covering the Grammy Awards was akin to covering a news event because you don't know the you don't know who's going to win the award. So we were able to get a radio crew out under the iVisa category to cover the Grammy Awards. So that was seen as media material, informational material for iVisa purposes. We've also sent out a crew who was on location at Disneyland, talking about the day in the life in Disney, interviewing people who work behind the scenes at Disney, interviewing Imagineers and engineers, and interviewing the staff and the people who come to visit these parks. And that was seen as, again, it doesn't appear to be hard news, but it was seen as part of a news gathering process to share to a foreign audience. So we've worked with a number of different types of projects, and we really look, you want to look really closely at, is this in any way part of an information or news gathering process? Now, if it is purely commercial, under the guise of being newsworthy, it's not going to work. The embassy is going to ask, what's the purpose of this project? And if the purpose is to have a commercial, if there's a commercial angle, if a company is looking to hire a advertising agency or a media agency to promote a product, that's not going to fly for iVisa purposes. Other thing to bear in mind is that if someone's going out for a reality TV program, that's also not seen as informational for iVisa purposes, and it wouldn't fit into this iVisa classification. Someone who's going out to act in a reality TV program, even if it seems like, well, this is something that you don't know the results of. This is real-time news happening. It still doesn't meet the caliber of activity that qualifies for iVisa purposes. We're going to cover toward the end of our half hour together today. I'm going to talk about some latest developments in the regulations having to do with social media. So there's some new developments that are promising within the social media context because it's gained so much traction that the regulations now account for that. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. So I think I touched upon this, but we'll go through this once more. Can an American media organization bring foreign journalists out to cover events in the US? The answer to that is yes, provided that the journalist who's coming out is covering US news, again, primarily for a foreign audience. So this would be, again, sort of, let's take for example, CNN. They might see the need for a British journalist or a French journalist to come out to cover news that they know would be of interest to a French audience or a British audience. And they know that American journalists might not be able to cover the angle in the same way that a French journalist could. And so they might find it beneficial to bring out that foreign journalist. And as long as the foreign journalist is working for that foreign bureau, then it could qualify for iVisa classification. So, for example, if you've got CNN in the US looking to send someone out from their Paris bureau to the US, that would work as long as that reporter is customarily employed by that foreign foreign company, by the foreign office, and if their home office is on the ground in Paris. But we'd also want to we'd want to make a case for why that person needs to be in the US. Is it a particular news story unfolding that is going to be of particular interest to a French audience? So we need to put context behind the event that's being reported on or the project that's being covered. Now, just touching upon independent production companies. Independent production companies, we've gotten iVisas for, as long as, again, the same rules really apply. We're looking at the credentials of that journalist or that photographer. or that producer or that director. And we're looking at what the nature of the work is in the U.S. Is it primarily commercial or entertainment related, or is there something meatier? Are they covering something that's of genuine interest from the news gathering perspective? So independent film producers, if they're doing something like a documentary, that's quite clearly within the realm of information gathering and disseminating news and information. Again, it may not seem like it's hard news, but it is, does qualify for I-Visa purposes. Covering a documentary very, very squarely does. Now, where there's gray area is, what if that documentary is then later being used to promote a product or promote something that is of a commercial value? Well, the regulations don't quite address that issue. If the intention from the start is to produce a piece of media for the sake of producing, for the sake of spreading the word about this document through a documentary. For example, we did an I-Visa for someone who did a music documentary, was covering an interesting aspect of a musical instrument that was getting a lot of press and coverage. It was actually within electronic music, and so we were able to send that person out under I-Visa to produce this documentary. Now later, this documentary, turns out it was picked up by, there was interest from sort of Sony Music and Columbia Music and other big music studios, and wanted to collaborate and get in touch with those producers, independent producers who did the documentary. We don't know what became then of that, whether that sort of parlayed into some sort of commercial venture, but that didn't impact his ability to get the I-Visa to begin with, to do that documentary, and it didn't put him in a position where he appeared to misrepresent himself, because he didn't know where that documentary was going to go and where it would take him. So generally speaking, documentaries are seen as I-Visa qualified material. Now, framing an application to get the visa. So we sort of talked about who qualifies as a foreign media representative. That would be someone who generally has journalist credentials or the journalist experience and fits into a type of activity that's central to the media production. So there could be journalists, reporters, news photographers, producers, directors. Those are sort of the obvious presenters. Those would be the types of jobs that would qualify for I-Visa status. We then talked about the type of media organization that would qualify, and we really look at where the headquarters of that organization are, and also what's the international scope of that organization. We talked about the nature of activities that would qualify. What's the material that would qualify for I-Visa status? And that's really material that's seen as part of a news gathering process. Now, once you know that those boxes can be ticked, you then want to look at, okay, how do you actually evidence all of those key points? Because you do have to put together a strong application package to present to an embassy officer so that you can actually get the visa granted. And so the type of evidence that you would want to provide would be information about that actual organization that you work for. So you'd want, for example, you might want to take along a company brochure. You might want to take along incorporation information or an annual report. Now, the embassies are getting more media savvy, social media savvy. They're looking they're looking online, and they're doing their homework about applicants and organizations, but it's good to have that information with you too, to be able to present it to an officer. You also want to then show the qualifications of the applicant. So you'd want to show if you've got a journalism degree or a degree in communications or a degree in radio and film broadcasting, bring that degree certificate. If you have an NCTJ certificate, National Council for Training of Journalism, bring along that certificate, bring along a CV or proof of any other prior journalism experience. There's no requirement that you have a degree from the Columbia School of Journalism. There's actually no requirement you have the NCTJ either, but you do want to show that in some way, shape, or form you have journalism experience, a journalism background. Another useful thing that I tell my clients is, do you have a press card? And some of them may have never had one, may have never had to have had one, but I say, look to see if you can get a press card, because that really looks like, that shows, that gives further credence to your qualifications as a foreign journalist. You know, the BBC and various other organizations do give press cards, and there's a whole list where you can find organizations that provide press cards to journalists. It's another good thing to bring to the table. And then, of course, you want to show evidence of what you're going to be doing. What's the activity in the US? What is the project? So that could be in the form of a company letter. It could be in the form of some sort of agreement that's been written. Anything that you can do to show what it is you're going to be doing, the amount of time you're going to need to be in the US. And it's important to know that even if you're in the US for a day and you're actually doing reporting work or doing work on a project, that requires a visa. You don't want to take any chances now, especially under these heightened restrictions and tighter standards. You don't want to take the chance of going over just as a visitor, even if it's for a day, if you're going to be working there, because although you could possibly sort of fall under the radar on that one visit, it could come back to haunt you later if there is ever any, if this rises to the surface that, you know, the project that you did for a day then gets, you know, broadcast around the world. You then at some later point in time apply for a visa to stay for a longer period, and you'll then have to disclose this. It could all come out. So you really don't want to take any chances. I think applying for a visa, being overly conservative is the name of the game. And I usually tell clients, you know, it could be short-term pain for long-term gain. You know, you might have to spend a bit of money and effort and time to get the right visa in place, but the long-term gain is such that you won't have to worry about being denied entry or having you know, problems entering the US in the future. So putting together a strong application is extremely important. Pulling together the evidence that proves that you have I-visa eligibility. And then you do have to present yourself in the right way to that officer. You've got to know how to nail that interview. You've got to know how to respond to questions, about your qualifications, about the organization you work for, and about the project that you're going to be undertaking in the US. It has to be polished. It has to be perfect. And you want to work with someone who can help you not only put together compile the strongest application paperwork, but also then package that and prepare you for a solid visa interview that sort of gets you across the finish line and gets you that approval you're looking for. Now, I wanted to touch for a few minutes on something we spoke about, which is an interesting new development in the I-visa regulations. Specifically, the regulations, for anyone who might be interested, are found in the Foreign Affairs Manual 9 FAM 402. And there's been some changes to the regulations or additions to the regulations. The Foreign Affairs Manual is really the Bible that embassy officers look at when deciding whether to approve or deny an application. These are the governing regulations that dictate how they respond to applications, and how they interview applicants, and how they make their decisions. So the latest development has to do with what they call new media, new electronic media platforms, and blogging. And really, as I was looking through these regulations, I thought, oh, this is an interesting new development. This is really good. Maybe they're becoming more open-minded about who qualifies for I-visa classification. And really, what it sort of my read of it is that it's the same principles apply, but they're really just using now more current lingo. You know, they're talking about bloggers, and they're talking about the internet, whereas you didn't see that in the regulations before. But they talk about bloggers, and they say bloggers now could be seen as members of a foreign media organization, whereas again, once they weren't at one point in time addressed at all. But bloggers are seen as qualified journalists for I-visa purposes, as long as they are working for a foreign media organization and they're covering informational, newsworthy material. So really the same principles apply if you're working as a blogger on an electronic media platform. You still have to show that you've got the credentials and that you are working for an organization that has the credentials. So again, you want to still prove the same things that you would prove if you were a more traditional journalist. You'd want to show, okay, you're a blogger, but how did you become a blogger, and what is your degree credential, or what's your experience, and who is it that you actually work for. So to give you some examples of what could work for I-visa purposes, one thing that could be okay is, let's just say you're a political blogger covering an election in the US. Now that would be okay as long as you're working, again, for a foreign media organization and the content is newsworthy. Something else that would be seen as okay under these new rules would be if you're a travel blogger and you're reporting on your own activities, say you're at a national park. Again, that would be okay as long as you're working for a foreign media organization and the content is newsworthy. But where it crosses the line would be, let's just say you're an independent blogger, and maybe you've been doing it for a long time and you have a lot of followers, you know, and good credentials as a blogger. But maybe you're maintaining a personal blog and you're covering personal experiences in the US. And maybe you are in a national park, or maybe you're even, you know, at a campaign, and so there's some sort of political angle to it. It wouldn't be seen as newsworthy if it's really just your own personal blog and you're covering your own personal experiences. So you really generally have to be tied to a foreign media organization to be able to blog in the US and apply for an I-visa. So those are some good, promising developments. At least they're recognizing that there's new types of media out there, and there are people who are covering newsworthy events but might not fit into that traditional mold. That really covers what I wanted to cover today in this brief half hour that we had. I think the I-visa, again, is a really good option for some qualified employees. The other options can take much more time. The O visa is often used for those in the media and entertainment. The H-1B visa, but the O visa requires a lengthy petition process, and it could take weeks, if not months, to get that approved, if at all, if there aren't a lot of challenges. The H-1B is also a challenging type of visa. So the I visa could be a useful, it could be useful knowledge for you to have. And if you do need assistance with the I-Visa, certainly do give us a call here at Immigration. We do have over 10 years of experience working with all kinds of people in the media on the I-Visa category. And of course, we will tell it to you straight. We will tell you if you're not eligible or if there are going to be some challenges. And so we'd be pleased to hear from anybody who has any interest in learning more about the I-Visa category. We thank you for tuning in, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.